All right. Thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. My name is Alyse Olson with the Kendall County Soil and Water Conservation District, SWCD for short. And I'm very excited about today's pollinator habitat webinar and our presenters today. The agenda is listed on the screen, and I'll provide an introduction for each of the speakers at the beginning of their presentations. I'd like to introduce our co-hosts for today's webinar. Spring Duffy is with the McHenry Lake County SWCD, and Brooke Ketcher is with the Grundy County SWCD, and they will be helping to monitor questions in the chat. So anyone with a question can go ahead and type that in the chat at any time, and we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing links and other resources in the chat box throughout the webinar. And the chat feed can be saved for later reference for anyone who's interested. So we will have instructions on how to do that in the chat box. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone to keep their videos and microphones off during the presentations. So thank you everyone for being here, and we will get started with Eleanor Schumacher's presentation. So Eleanor, I will stop sharing my screen. And if you would like to pull up yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me just get situated on my screen. Can you see my screen?
I can see it, and I will provide a brief introduction for you real quick.
Thank you.
All right, Eleanor is the Illinois Pollinator Liaison for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, also known as NRCS. She will be sharing about the importance of native pollinators and native plants. Eleanor previously worked as a resource conservationist for a soil and water conservation district in Southern Illinois. She holds a master's degree in natural resources and environmental sciences with a focus in pollination ecology from the University of Illinois. She is an Illinois master naturalist and has 3 prairies of her own, which she restored in 2016 and actively manages. So Eleanor, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Alyse, and thank you so much for putting on this fantastic event. Thank you, Spring, and thank you, Brooke. It's really an honor to be here, and we have some great presentations today. So I looked down the list of attendees. I'm excited to see some names I recognize and a lot of people with us today. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. I'm Eleanor Schumacher. I work for Pollinator Partnership as the Illinois NRCS Liaison and also the Project Wingspan Illinois State Coordinator. I'm a gig economy person, so I also have another job working for the Illinois Department of Agriculture as an apiary inspector. I inspect beehives. I've been interested in pollinators and their habitat since 2008 when I first got my own beehives. Working for the Illinois Department of Ag for 11 years as an apiary inspector really changed my perspective about the actual dangers that pollinators face in the environment. It also gave me an appreciation for how critically important it is that our nation and our world do everything we can to put back pollinator habitat and to keep our food security strong that way. Pollinators and flowers depend on each other. Pollination is an ecosystem service, a system that supports life on Earth. And the fact that there are so many different flowers, so many different pollinators that make up this system is something we need to be aware of and actively protect and recreate our landscapes. I keep a positive outlook about the decline of pollinators and the steep loss of their habitat. I'm positive because working with bees, I've seen what Mother Nature is capable of, how she has healing mechanisms built into life, all of its forms, and all its ecosystems, life-supporting systems. I'm positive because I live on a conventional dairy farm. I have 40 hives of treatment-free honeybees, and I have 3 small prairies I built and manage on my own, totaling 5 acres. And I live in a farming community that includes an organic farmer and some conventional farmers, many of them conservation farmers who are passionate about nature and human health. I know we can do this, but we have to be honest about the facts. We have a pollinator paradox. The United States and truly the whole world relies on pollinators to feed us. $20 billion worth of US products are pollinated by bees, butterflies, beetles, ants, and flies. But our farm and ranch lands that support pollinators are disappearing at a rate of 3,000 acres per day. We know that pollinators are in trouble, but how bad is it? What's actually happening? Over the past 35 years, our agricultural and natural resource agencies have noticed a rapid decline of pollinators due to several causes, including land use intensification, pesticide use, climate change, exotic and invasive species competition, and the spread of pests and diseases. Here's a poster put together by the SWCD that breaks it down pollinator by pollinator. We have a 28% decline in bumblebees. 19% of US butterflies are at risk of extinction. 50% of leafcutter bee species are at risk. 27% of mason bee species are at risk. And 27 species of non-native lady beetles threaten our native beetles. Put this together with USDA resources that report numerous species of butterflies, moths, and native bees are either extremely rare or are extinct. We realize we have a real problem on our hands. Between 2008 and 2014, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture granted $40 million to researchers, extension, and educational outreach. USDA has supported agricultural programs geared towards wildlife for a few decades, but in 2014, pollinators got a much more primary role on the stage. Here's a picture of the here's a picture of Illinois' own Dr. May Berenbaum, head of the University of Illinois' Entomology Department and past president of the Entomological Society of America. President Barack Obama just awarded her the National Medal of Science that year. Research like hers helped gain recognition of the pollinator decline problem. The Obama administration established the Pollinator Task Force to develop a national strategy to protect and promote the health of pollinators. USDA and US EPA released the Pollinator Research Action Plan in May 2015, which called for a federal agenda, including research to restore and increase pollinator habitat and populations. Most importantly, though, what's happening to pollinators? You're here today to see what you can do. We're working together to save them, and we have a long way to go. It takes decades worth of research to influence policy. The research is ongoing. A focus on food security is key to helping the world understand what's at stake. These are figures that researchers agree on. 75% of global food crops depend on pollinators. 1 out of 3 bites of food we eat are because a pollinator visited a flower. Declines in production are associated with pollinator decline. On the right of the slide, you see what's now a well-known picture. This is from Whole Foods' Share the Buzz campaign, a collaboration with the SWCD in 2013. Here's a better look at those pictures. Your produce choices with bees, your produce choices without bees. Global agriculture and our national agriculture is vulnerable to pollinator decline. This USDA map shows which states are the most affected by pollinator decline. A new study was just published in Environmental Science and Technology this year. It shows the economic dependence and vulnerability of our US agriculture sector county by county. The figures were based on 2012 US agricultural industry of pollinator dependent crops, a $34 billion industry at the time. A picture of the vulnerability of our food security and associated economic losses helps us see how close to home pollinator decline hits. Researchers have been highlighting pollinator loss as a threat to our existence for decades, studying important animal and insect pollinated crops worldwide. Here are just a few studies that have shown what's at stake. A 1994 study that showed 84% of European crops depend on animal pollination. A 2003 study breaking down the economic worth of honeybee population and native bee population that estimated $6.8 billion were attributed to honeybee pollination and $3.1 billion to native bees. A A 2008 study estimated global crop production from insect pollination was worth $217 billion. And now this study, from where this picture comes from, our map of vulnerability, it identifies the counties most vulnerable based on the type of pollinator-mediated foods they produce, but also based on the scale of pollinator decline in that region. Most vulnerable. In first place, counties producing fruit and nuts. In second place, counties producing melons and vegetables. In third place, counties producing oilseed like canola and soybean. You see, if you look at our state, Illinois does have some color. Illinois is the #1 state for pumpkin export, and of course, a big soybean exporter. But we have extremely low acreage of pollinator habitat and steep pollinator decline. Put these studies together with studies that show how pollinator habitat incorporated into cropland can make on-farm improvements, and we have new methods of conservation. This 2017 prairie strip study from University of Iowa showed amazing benefits from planting pollinator habitat on farms, a real winner. Here's a look at the results. 44% reduction in water runoff, 95% reduction in soil loss, 90% reduction in phosphorus runoff, 84% reduction in nitrogen runoff. No difference in per acre corn and soybean yields. Weed abundance did not increase, and reduced emissions of heat trapping gases, especially nitrous oxide. Now that's all great news, but if you were disappointed reading that there was no difference in soybean yields, it's not bad news. It showed that incorporating pollinator habitat into crop fields didn't reduce yields. That's a positive. Anyhow, there are studies that demonstrate increase in soybean and other crop yields. Let's look at a few. Here's a strong one. This study found soybean yields were significantly increased by honeybees and wild bees. And then this 2017 study found honeybees increased soybean yield by 18%. Just published this year is an extensive review of all the studies investigating the influence of pollinators on self-pollinating crops like soybeans, cotton, coffee, and canola. It showed benefits from native bees and called for more study. Finally, a 2014 study that looked at native bees on canola in Manitoba. They suggest growing wildflowers adjacent to canola field margins to increase canola yields. They found the system of pollination significantly strengthened with benefits to the crops when pollinator habitat was planted nearby. This study highlights an extremely important concept, that pollination is a system that revolves around diverse populations of native bees and native wildflowers, benefiting from each other. Now let's take a look at the system that once governed this land we live on. In Illinois, this prairie wildlife habitat that we're racing to restore once covered 60% of our state. Illinois had 22 million acres of native wildflower and grasses, teeming with pollinators. Today, we only have 2,500 acres, about 1/100th of 1%. But this number is on the rise with people like you taking interest in either planting or helping manage pollinator habitat. Here's a look back in time. A University of Illinois professor of botany named Arthur G. Vestal authored beautiful descriptions of rich prairie landscapes that were quickly disappearing 100 years ago. His book, A Black Soil Prairie Station, documents native wildflower communities as they existed undisturbed in northern Illinois. Here's a quote. Perhaps the most luxuriant type of prairie with a large number of plant species. Until recently, small and scattered areas of this prairie were still abundant west of Chicago as far as the Fox River and beyond. While several of the scientific names of some of these native wildflowers and native grasses have changed, we recognize most of these species and include them in pollinator habitat restoration mixes today. This is a list of species he found at a typical upland prairie site. Red circles around grasses, blue around wildflowers. Let's see the pictures. Little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, prairie dropseed, partridge peat, hoary vervain, Savannah blazing star, gray goldenrod, stiff goldenrod, silky aster, and white heath aster, which you might think of as a weed, but the pollinators love it. Here is what Vestal found in a typical mesic prairie 100 years ago. Mesic means moderately moist, whereas the previous slide was drier. Let's jump right to the pictures. Cream white indigo, lead plant, purple prairie clover, goat's rue, round-headed bush clover, common evening primrose, butterfly milkweed, whorled milkweed, hoary puccoon, compass plant, pale purple coneflower, yellow coneflower, and field thistle. Why are these plants and their communities so important? In our general understanding of flowers, we think of gardens, human-controlled spaces that are planted in exotic species. This creates a problem for two reasons. One, many of our native pollinators don't recognize the non-native plants. Many bees are specialists and have specialist diets that depend on one kind of flower. They didn't evolve with the cultivars we buy at the typical garden center. They don't recognize them and can't be sustained by them. Two, when plants are bred and manipulated into cultivars, new plants are created for color and height. We see some nectar profiles changing, and this can result in loss of nutritional value for the pollinators. For wildlife, natives are better. Who are these pollinators? They're not just bees. Flies are important pollinators, specifically syrphid flies, bee flies, and tachnid flies, not house flies. The most important flies to flowers are the syrphid flies, all of which consume nectar. Butterflies and moths are next in line of importance after the flies. They are nectarivores. Some studies have shown some species to travel farther than bees, which has genetic advantages, that plants get genetics shared over greater distances. And don't forget about hummingbirds, beetles, and bats, also pollinators. But bees are the most important pollinator. All species of bees are florivores, with adults and larvae feeding on products of the flower. Their bodies have pollen collecting structures, which makes them pollinating superheroes. The United States has 4,000 species of bees. Now, how do we talk about 4,000 species of bees? The easiest way is to classify them by where they nest and what they eat. 70% of native bees are ground nesters. They nest in bare soil, just under bunch grasses and prairies. They like sunny south-facing stream banks and mud cliffs, or they'll dig some holes or find some holes that were already dug by someone else. 30% of native bees are cavity nesters. They like pithy twigs, snags or dead trees, bundles of reeds, woodblocks. Then we can break bees into generalist and specialist categories. While most bees are generalist, meaning they'll pollinate anything their little tongues can access, 20% of native bees are specialists. Specialist bees have a mutualistic relationship with the flowers they've evolved with over the eons. This coevolution has changed the characteristics of these species to match each other more closely, to the exclusion of others. It's very romantic. Let's learn about just a few of the species. We don't have really much time left. So let's see, we'll look at this. We'll go fast. In 2010 in Hancock County in Western Illinois, native bees were trapped and identified to create a picture of what kinds of native bees could still be found. The traps were set at the Kib Life Science Station in Warsaw, Illinois. The study was led by Professor Ken McCravey from Western Illinois University and published in 2014. His team trapped 4,622 bees of 31 genera and 111 species, quite a number. Here's one important one they found in fair number, the squash bee. Squash bees are specialists visiting only squash flowers. A little about this bee. Of the 13 species of squash bees, Peponapis pruinosa is the only squash bee native to the United States. That's a lot of pressure considering USDA calls them the most important specialist bee in agriculture. Leafcutter bees are also really important to agriculture, especially alfalfa. You see this one on top carrying a rolled up leaf. It cut the round piece of leaf just as it landed in 2 seconds. Before it even finished the cut, it was already lifting off to fly again. That's how they do it. That's why you might see holes on your rosebush leaves, but you never see who'd done it. The leafcutter bee lines its nest and wraps its brood in leaves. He also found the Anthophora abrupta mustached mud bee, which pollinates cranberries, lives in mud banks. And an interesting thing, the University of Florida researchers discovered colonies of the mustached mud bee in bags full of mud, and they're trying to manage colonies for production that way. A lot of bumblebees caught by the study. There's 47 species of bumblebees in the US. They're especially valuable for their buzz pollination, which kicks up a large amount of pollen all over their hairy bodies, which they then transfer. They're the first and last of the season to pollinate, but there's a very steep decline in several species and a lot of diseases and habitat loss. Just a picture of a whole bunch more different kinds of bees that they found over there in Warsaw. And here's my plug for Pollinator Partnership. We're a non-for-profit organization with all kinds of programs and opportunities to save pollinators. Here's a visual glance at some of the many projects and resources we offer. Of course, your local USDA Service Center is a resource for you. You can find pamphlets and informational materials to learn more about planting pollinator habitat. You'll hear more about that from Vicki. She's up next. But how can you save pollinators? Get as much as you can out of these presentations today, and look for presentations during Pollinator Week, June 21st through June 27th. If you are a landowner or a farmer, USDA can help you establish pollinator habitat. My organization, Pollinator Partnership, can complement what they offer by certifying your farm as a bee-friendly farm, BFF. Use our BFF logo and your certification it adds value to the crops you grow and sell on your farm. Also, very important, you can help me establish more Illinois acres of pollinator habitat by getting involved with Project Wingspan. I'm seeking volunteers for the 2021 season. We're collecting native wildflower seeds and awarding them to local pollinator habitat projects. It's a labor of love and a lot of fun. Plant a garden. Vicki will tell you how next. I'd like to close by saying a lot of people want to save the bees by becoming a beekeeper. As an Illinois Department of Agriculture apiary inspector that works with beekeepers and their honeybees all over the state, I would like to say, being a beekeeper does not save the bees. Planting habitat is the way to save the bees. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Eleanor. I love those bee names. All right, Vicki, you're up next if you want to get your screen up and ready, and then I will provide a brief introduction for you.
Okay, give me just a second here. Okay, can you see that, Alyse?
Not yet, but sometimes it takes a minute.
Let me go back to the Zoom screen here.
Hope it looks like it's going. Okay, it looks like it's up.
Okay.
So Vicki has a degree in landscape architecture and works for NRCS in Illinois. She will be sharing about pollinator garden design. She recently worked with NRCS Biologists to develop a pollinator garden design guide to help people make their own landscapes friendly to pollinators.
Thank you, Alyse, for this opportunity to speak today. As Alyse mentioned, I'm going to be speaking on gardening and pollinators and the value of planting for pollinators in our own spaces. As Eleanor laid out in her presentation, pollinators and insects play a critical role in our environment. And though one garden may seem insignificant, like a drop in the bucket in terms of the overall landscape and the overall habitat need, when you consider that in the United States, we mow an area roughly the size of the state of Indiana, you realize collectively, if we all did a little to support pollinators in our yards, we could have a significant impact. A number of years ago, Starr, who will be speaking next, and I had an opportunity to work with the Princeton Library to design and install a demonstration pollinator garden. This here is a picture of the garden in Princeton. And most of the work we do as agencies, NRCS and SWCD, is in the developing pollinator habitat on larger tracts of land through Farm Bill programs. However, in working on this garden, we saw an opportunity to put together information for people who were interested in doing something for pollinators on their property, but had much smaller areas to work with. So we decided to develop a pollinator garden design guide that would kind of lay out the process from the beginning to the end, from site preparation through maintenance. For people who might be interested in developing their own pollinator gardens, or people who might be working with a group such as a school. And this guide is available along with a lot of other information on insects and pollinators on the Illinois NRCS pollinator page. Alyse is going to drop a link to this page in the chat on the right of the screen. And you can also find the page by searching Illinois NRCS pollinator from most browsers. Today, in the time I have, I wanted to touch on some of the information covered in the Pollinator Garden Design Guide, information including what do pollinators need in a garden, how do you prepare your site for planting, introduce you to the garden designs we've included in this guide, and provide information about maintaining your garden. I also wanted to share with you some photos of pollinator gardens and some native, some naturalized gardens for inspiration. So, what do pollinators need in a garden? They need a source of energy, nectar and pollen, and they need areas to rest and nest, and they need an environment that is not toxic to them. So not unlike the needs that we have as human beings. Food. In your gardens, you want to select plants that offer pollinators a supply of pollen and nectar, concentrating on plants that are native, and even better, native to the region that you live. Because those insects and pollinators and those native plants have evolved together. How do you know what those plants are? In the chat, Alyse is going to share a couple of lists and a couple of sites you can visit. There are, of course, plants listed in our design guide, but these will be in addition to that. So the first list is particularly useful for native plants that do well in a landscape setting. And you can find it on the site Natural Garden Natives. So this is actually a wholesale grower site, and I'm not necessarily endorsing any nurseries, but they have a really nice list here that's worth checking out. Excuse me. And then we have a few lists you can find on the Illinois NRCS pollinator page as well. The same page as the design guide. When you go there, just look right below the design guide and you'll find those lists. I've also noticed that many nurseries, particularly native plant nurseries, now designate plants that are important to pollinators on their websites. And if you want to get deep in the woods, you can find out, deep in the weeds, I should say, more appropriately, you can find out what plants grow in your region by checking out the USDA plants database online or the website illinoiswildflowers.info. I think Alyse is also going to pop those into the chat. Those sites will give you some idea of the range of a given plant by the county. You do have to look up plants individually, so it requires a little time, but there's a lot of good information there. Like us, pollinators eat all the time. They need a continuous supply of food throughout the growing season. So it's important to provide continuous bloom or flowers blooming during the entire flight season, from early spring to late fall. The gardens in the guide each include 9 different forb species or native flowering plants, in addition to grasses that cover that time span. And if you don't have room in your garden to plant all of the plants, consider teaming up with a neighbor or even multiple neighbors. I love the idea of a neighborhood pollinator garden, and gardening is a great way to connect with and meet other people. Another beneficial practice is clustering plants of the same species together for efficient foraging, especially for bees, who commonly display something called floral constancy. Bees are focused foragers. Unlike myself at a grocery store, they get what they go for. When they are out foraging, they tend to collect from one species at a time. They'll move, say, from one aster to another, which also makes them good pollinators because they get the right pollen to the right plant, the aster pollen to the aster plant. And nesting areas. Many of our native bees are ground nesting bees, and as Eleanor mentioned, and like to nest at the base of plants. It's a good idea to leave some bare areas of soil for ground nesters in your garden. Having said that, though, when you first plant your garden, you will likely want to mulch it. That helps control weeds and helps maintain the soil moisture and soil temperature. However, you might leave some areas of bare soil around the garden, and then once the plants are established, discontinue or limit the use of mulch. In my yard, I actually have a hill that faces south with areas of bare soil on it. And every spring, the hill is filled literally with pencil-sized holes and humming with ground nesting bees. Last year, I was pulling weeds when I heard a bee fly right past my ear and saw it slip into a nest at the base of some Pennsylvania sedge. It was very cool to watch. Other bees nest in cavities, such as the hollow stems of plants or old borer holes. So it's also important to leave some plants standing in the fall for bees to nest in, and even some deadwood if you have that as well. I would also add that in the fall, the colonies of bees like the bumblebee die off, leaving only the new queen to overwinter. Usually she'll overwinter just below the surface of the soil. So waiting later in the spring, until later in the spring, like April, May, to rake out your beds can help to ensure that you don't disturb the queen, who is responsible for carrying on the survival of the entire colony. And then avoid or limit the use of insecticides. You don't want to invite pollinators to your garden and then inadvertently kill them with insecticides. So limit their use and read any labels before using any insecticide. One type of insecticide, since systemic insecticides, are of particular concern. Those are the insecticides that are taken up into plant tissue and can persist in pollen and nectar. In fact, when you buy your plants at the nursery, you may want to check the label or ask if they've been treated with systemic insecticides. Planting your garden is hands down the fun part of establishing a garden. But site preparation and maintenance can make or break your garden. I think you could compare site prep to getting ready to paint a room in an old house. It takes a lot of time to fill the nail holes, repair the cracks before you paint, and it is not glamorous, but once you see the finished product, you're happy you spent the time doing it. Garden site prep is similar, except your goal is to eliminate the competition, and that includes any existing vegetation that's currently growing there and any seeds or roots in the soil that could grow given the opportunity. The 4 methods we cover in the handout include sod removal, smothering, tilling, and herbicide application. And they all have their pros and cons. Sod removal is the quickest. If you decide today you want to plant a garden this weekend, hypothetically, because it's a little bit wet out, you could use this technique. It involves getting a hold of or renting a sod cutter, removing the sod, tilling and smoothing the soil over, and then planting. And this is the technique that we used at the pollinator garden. If you have more time and don't have access to a sod cutter, you could use the smothering technique. And if any of you have ever left a tent or a kiddie pool set up too long in the yard and killed the grass, you have the basic idea of how this technique works. Plants need sunlight to survive, and smothering them deprives them of sunlight. And you start this process by mowing the vegetation on the lowest setting of your mower. And this just makes it easier to put down any material for smothering. Then during the growing season, grab some old plywood or a thick layer of newspaper and lay it down over that mown grass. And in 2 or 3 months, come back and the smothering process will have done its work. Another option is tilling. And tilling works best if you have an existing garden or an area with little vegetation. In that situation, you may be able to just go out there and simply pull the existing vegetation or till the area to prepare it for planting. And then herbicide application. You can apply a non-selective, non-persistent herbicide such as Roundup to kill existing vegetation. And as with insecticides, always read and follow the manufacturer's label. In order for herbicide to work, the vegetation has to be actively growing. And if you have an area of lawn and it's not too tall, you could probably just spray the grass as it is while it's growing. Sometimes in the heat of the summer it'll stop growing and it doesn't work as well then. However, if the vegetation is tall, you'll want to mow it to a height of about 3 to 6 inches. You want enough vegetation to get good coverage, but not so much that there's part of the plant that survives and you have to come back and kill it again. And then let me just touch on tilling one more time. So to till or not to till. Tilling can be used in conjunction with other techniques. And when I say tilling, I mean like going out there with a rototiller or using a hoe or something like that. And the nice thing about tilling is that it makes it easy to plant your vegetation. It's nice and loose, just like in the gardening shows, you can put your shovel in and easily plant your plants. However, when you till, you can bring weed seed to the surface. And if your site was lawn, that may not be a problem, or if it was an existing garden. But if you have a site that had a lot of weed pressure, you may want to skip tilling and just plant into the dead vegetation. And if you do till and you're still concerned about competition from anything lying in wait in the soil, roots and seeds, you can always wait a few weeks, see what grows, kill off that vegetation, and then plant again. And you can kill it off with rototilling, pulling, spraying, any number of ways. So doing a planting design, especially with plants you're not familiar with, can be a little bit intimidating. So Ellen and I decided to put together 5 different plans for a range of different sites within the garden design guide. We have one for a dry site with well-drained soils, one for a site that may stay wet for a few days after it rains, a site with poorly drained soils. We have one for a mesic site, which would be moderately well-drained soils, kind of right in between dry and wet. And those are all intended for full sun, sites with full sun. We do have a design in there for a savanna garden for sites that might have a part shade. And then there's a tall border garden in there as well. And we try to include everything in there that you would need to have to plant your garden. So we have like, the gardens are 20 foot by 6 foot. They include the plant names, the Latin name, the number of plants that you would need, the height of the plant, the spacing that you'll want to space them on, and then the locations where they would go within the garden. And just as I mentioned, Latin names, many plants go by multiple common names, so it's always best to purchase your plants and double check the Latin name against the tag to make sure you get the right plant. And I would also add here that in addition to site prep and maintenance, knowing what kind of site you have is key to selecting the right plants for a successful garden. So you want to know how much solar exposure your site has. Is it a site with full sun, more than say 6 or 8 hours of sunlight, part sun with say 4 to 6 hours, or is it a shady site with less than 4 hours? And what kind of soil do you have? Oh, you want to get your hands in the dirt and get a feel for your soil. Pay attention to whether it drains quickly after a rain, or whether if it holds water for a few days after it rains, or is maybe somewhere in between. I'm not going to get too deep into soil because of limited time, but we do have some descriptions in the guide which may help you decide what soil conditions you have on your site, at your home or school or wherever you're working. And you can also check out the USDA Web Soil Survey online, and they have an app available as well, which is really cool. You can actually take your phone to where to your property and pull up the app, and it'll tell you what kind of soil you have on that site. As an agency, NRCS soil scientists have mapped most of the soils in the country, and the information they put together is used by many people for many different purposes. But I should mention that the soil survey is accurate at field level, so like farm field level, not at the scale of a residence. However, it might be able to point you in the right direction on what type of drainage or soil texture you may have in your yard. It won't necessarily be that exact soil type. I do want to point that out. So maintenance. The success of many a garden rises and falls on maintenance. And I'm sure we've all experienced that, especially during establishment. And you'll often hear it said that native plants are suited to this climate and therefore are lower maintenance. And that can be true once they're established. However, during establishment, you want to water the plants throughout the growing season whenever the soil begins to dry out or if the plants start to wilt, particularly that first year, that year of establishment. And mulch. As I mentioned earlier, though we ultimately want to have some bare soil for nesting bees, mulch can be really helpful that first year to help maintain soil moisture, soil temperature, and help keep the weeds down. And as with any garden, be sure to keep an eye on the competition and weed as necessary. Oh, and I should also add a note on fertilizer. Fertilizer use is not recommended. The native plants don't need it, and fertilizer can also encourage weed growth. No sense helping them along. So So our pollinator guide is focused on native forbs or native wildflowers, another name for native forbs, and grasses. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention trees and shrubs. They play an important role for pollinators. Trees and shrubs often flower early when there are fewer herbaceous flowers available to pollinators. I've noticed in my area that the buds on the silver maples are already swelling, and some have popped a little bit, actually. And over the next couple of months, many trees and shrubs will start flowering, including trees and shrubs like this serviceberry here and the eastern redbud. In addition, if you look at the canopy of a tree and flower, it packs a lot of flowers into a small space. Think of how many flowers are on a tree, and then imagine how much room that would take to hold that same number of flowers on the ground. Honeybees actually collect resin from trees, and they make something called propolis, which they then use to fill small gaps in their hives. And borer holes, abandoned borer holes or holes created by boring insects can be used by cavity nesting bees, in addition to the remaining vegetation from the last year. They can use these holes to nest in. And generally, a diversified habitat is more resilient than a habitat that is less diversified. So if you have trees and shrubs in your landscape, keep them if they work. And don't forget to consider them in any planting you may do as well. This is a picture of a white oak tree. This tree was actually approximately 350 years old. It got blown over in a storm and they had to cut it down, which was very sad, but that is just amazing to me. But oaks, according to an entomologist from the University of Delaware, Dr. Talmay, support more butterfly and moth species than any other native tree or plant. And here, this slide, it shows the number of butterfly and moth species that use woody plants for larval resources. And I like this slide because it really illustrates just the sheer number of butterflies and moths that are supported by trees and shrubs, you know, for the purposes of like egg laying, as larval hosts, and as overwintering sites. So that, in a nutshell, is a quick overview of the Pollinator Garden Design Guide, from site preparation through maintenance. And this is a photo of a home in Normal where the homeowner used one of those garden designs as an inspiration for their garden. Here you can see at the front, there's the orange butterfly weed. And then right behind that is some side oats grama, a grass. Golden Alexanders, that's the yellowish colored plant. And you can barely see it, but on the side of the Golden Alexanders, there's some white prairie clover. And the tall plant on the right here is blazing star. This landowner also happens to be involved in the local chapter of the native plant enthusiast group called the Wild Ones. The Bloomington Normal chapter is in the process of developing a pollinator pathway map with general locations of pollinator gardens in the Bloomington Normal area. So you can find that information on the Bloomington Normal Wild Ones chapter website. I should also mention a couple of things about this slide. Anytime you plant vegetation close to a road, you'll want to maintain traffic sight lines. So particularly at the corners, because you want to be able to see cars, bicycles, things like that coming up and down the street. This planting here and the garden designs in the design guide were designed with potted plants or plugs, which are individual small plants, in mind. This site, however, this is a picture of a pollinator planting on a farm in Peoria County, and it was established by seeding as opposed to those potted plants or plugs in the previous example. It is beautiful. When you get out there, this is just a small slice of what you can see if you scan across the horizon, but the landowners used a diverse mix of grasses and forbs in their seed mix, and they have worked really hard to maintain the planting, including keeping an eye on and eliminating any undesirable plants that pop up and could become a problem. But one of the things that makes a prairie beautiful is the order and pattern that's created by the plants over a large area. The forms of the plants themselves, the flowers, the textures of the planting weave a kind of tapestry across the landscape. And the repetition of those forms, textures, and colors create a pattern, a sense of unity, a sense of order. But when you bring those same plants into a small space, you have to create that structure in a different way. So next, I wanted to show you some pollinator gardens you may want to check out for inspiration. And while we are looking at them, I wanted to point out some of the techniques they use to create a sense of order and structure in those smaller landscapes. This is a planting at Midwest Ground Covers. They have done two things here I want to point out. First, they've used plants that can hold their own in the landscape, plants that have good architectural form, such as the taller rattlesnake master on the left, or plants that may have a long bloom time, like the coneflower in the middle there. These plants also will provide winter interest. And then they've used grasses in the foreground to create a matrix within which to place the rest of the plants. Kind of I want to say the bones of the garden, but kind of the bones of the garden. Native plants commonly used within the landscape industry tend to be those prairie plants that are smaller, though not all, and those that don't spread aggressively through rhizomes or reseeding, and those that have good form. The second thing they've done here is massed or created drifts of the same species. So anytime you plant vegetation in masses, it has a visual weight that plants planted individually do not. Massing, as I mentioned earlier, also has the added benefit of concentrating blooms of the same plant together, making foraging efficient, especially for bees who tend to concentrate on one species of flower at a time. This photo is also at Midwest Ground Covers, and it includes both native and non-native plants, but I thought it was a good example of massing, as well as the use of the repetition of color and texture to tie a planting together. Whenever you repeat colors or palettes of color, texture, and strong form, that visually ties the planting together and helps create unity. And you can see here they've got like variations of the color of yellows and sort of a light green colors, and there's purple spread throughout there as well. And you can also pick up textures that are repeated throughout the planting and across the planting and form. If you ever happen to find yourself in Madison at the University of Wisconsin, they have used a lot of native plantings on their campus. Here's the fine texture of the prairie dropseed against the coarser texture of the lead plant play against each other and allow the viewer to delineate one plant from another. I think anytime you find a planting, I think especially for people who don't know native plants, if they're looking at it, one way to help them tell that it's a planting that's intentional and not something that someone's just stopped mowing, say for instance, is when you have plants of different textures, when you can tell one plant from another. When you get a planting that's all like medium texture, people have a hard time knowing whether or not that's was intended or not. And this is Lurie Garden in Chicago, definitely worth a visit if you happen to be in the area of Millennium Park during the summer. I also noticed a couple of years ago that the city had used a number of native plants near Navy Pier, if you happen to be down there. And near the Art Institute, on the lake side of the Art Institute, I think it's at the corner of Monroe or Columbus, I'm not Monroe or Columbus, I'm not exactly sure. They have a rain garden that uses native plants as well. Here they've used Joe Pieweed, a tall plant with a strong form that lends this particular planting structure. And then in the winter, it will add winter interest. And another nice thing about this garden is they actually have a website where you can go and look up the plants in Lurie Garden. So you can actually peruse through all the plants that they have there. I also want to point out in this picture, it doesn't stand out, but in the background there, you can kind of see a green wall, a hedge. And the hedge provides a backdrop for this planting. I don't know if the best way to say this, maybe like, or describe this, but maybe like a frame or a stage for the looser, less formal planting in the front of it. A wall or a fence, in addition to a hedge, could also serve the same role in your own landscape. And here again is Lurie Garden. They've used plants with flower colors that work well together. They've created a palette of whites, yellows, golds, silver that all kind of harmonize well. You have Rattlesnake Master again in the foreground. That's the one with the little ball type seed head there. A white coneflower cultivar behind the coneflower or behind the Rattlesnake Master. It has the golden seed head. And then the tall compass plant with yellow flowers in the background. And this is Olbrich Botanical Garden in Madison, Wisconsin. They have just two other examples of nice color combinations. You've got on the left, the purple of wild petunia and the pink of pale purple coneflower. In the back, there's a light pink allium. And then I think the yellow, I believe, is a coreopsis. And on the right, you have a red of what I believe is a smartweed and a pink of Queen of the Prairie, and then some purple of blue vervain in the background. And this is a picture of the Princeton pollinator garden. In this example, you have a small, tidy facer plant. This is wild geranium that was used to create or delineate the edge between the lawn and the rest of the planting section. You know, other plants like prairie dropseed, prairie smoke also work well as facer plants, the smaller of the native forbs. You can also use hard edges like pavers or brick, and that will help to define the edge. Or like the pavers in this example, create a sense of order in the garden. I should point out that a hard edge can also help prevent the lawn from creeping into your bed. When you get grass, if you get lawn grass into a bed that has other grasses in it, it can be difficult to tell the difference between one blade of grass and another to try to weed it. So it's always helpful to try to keep those lawn grasses from creeping in. And you can use a hard edge like those I just mentioned, brick. You can actually buy metal edging, or you can do a softer alternative like a trench edge, and that would work. Trench edge with a mulch edge. And a trench edge is really just if you were to take an edger such as a half moon shape edger and slice a straight edge along the grass and then an angled cut in toward the bed. So from the side, it would end up looking like a check mark in cross section. And again, that just helps keep the rhizomes from the lawn from encroaching on your bed. And then make it lush. A planting that is healthy and lush appears well tended. It also helps to prevent weeds from getting established in your garden. This planting is planting right in it's in the island of a parking lot. So very nice looking planting. And using sculpture to add structure and intention. Sculpture in your garden can help to create a sense of intention, add structure, as I mentioned, and even surprise. And this here is at the Chicago Botanical Garden. Here they've used really big sculpture and it adds a really big intention. Sign can also be a way of letting people know what you're up to in planting a pollinator garden. So that is kind of an overview of the pollinator design guide and some gardens that you might want to go and check out and visit, and some of the different techniques that people use to help incorporate those bigger native pollinator plants into their garden. I hope it gets you thinking about how you might incorporate pollinator plants into your garden, your own gardens. And I'll just close by sharing a few resources that might be of interest on this slide. A couple of books, 100 Easy to Grow Native Plants by Lorraine Johnson, Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rainier and Claudia West. And there are a few of the websites that I mentioned that Alyse put into the chat on the right. I know there are quite a few people out there on this webinar today, and if any of you know of pollinator gardens or native plantings that you think are worth visiting and would like to share those, or have maybe a favorite combination of plants, we'd love to hear about them. Just drop them in the chat, and happy gardening.
Great, thanks, Vicki. I liked the point that you made about asking the nursery that you're buying plants from if the plants were treated with systemic insecticides. I think that's something that people wouldn't really think to do. So that was a good tip. Thanks for that. All right, next up we will have Ellen Starr. Ellen, if you want to get your screen up, and then I can provide an introduction for you. All right, that looks good. So Ellen will be sharing about the life cycle and life history needs of monarchs. She has been employed as a biologist with NRCS for 23 years. The past 15 years, she has been an active advocate for pollinators and their native habitat, both professionally and personally, to inspire others to provide habitat for the insects. She started a 2,400 square foot pollinator garden in May of 2014 by the Princeton Public Library on property owned and supported by the city of Princeton. Her passion is ecosystem restoration to bring back much needed native habitat, not only for wildlife, but for human life also.
Thank you for the introduction, Alyse. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad to be here to have the opportunity to talk to you today about the magnificent monarch, the Illinois state butterfly. A most beloved monarch and well known by many, an iconic butterfly whose decline has captured the attention of many of us throughout the continent. Just in case you didn't know, the male monarchs on the right of the slide there can be distinguished from females, and she's depicted on the left. So the male has a dark spot or a patch on the vein of each hind wing. These are called androconial patches and are made of specialized scales which contain pheromones used in courtship. While the female has whiter veins and the male is duller, female has whiter veins than the male and is duller in color than the male. And the males and females are approximately the same size. There are two distinct populations of monarchs in North America, the eastern and western monarch population. Both are in decline, while this past year, 2020, the western population experienced a very large decline. The western population is located on the west coast, and they migrate from the Great Northwest and overwinter in California. They don't go to central Mexico like the eastern population. Today, I'll be talking to you about the eastern population. Scientists measure their population by how many hectares or acres the butterflies cover on the Oyamela fir trees in central Mexico. In 2013-14, they experienced a historic low where the entire eastern population only occupied 1.7 acres. The winter of 2019, monarchs covered about 7, while this past winter declined to about 5. Their populations experience a lot of fluctuation from year to year, and that is just the nature of insects. In the last 25 years, monarch populations have plunged by the hundreds of millions. It's according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Species Status Assessment Report. Scientists estimate 15 acres are needed to sustain their population. Well, we're about a third of that right now. And as you can see on the bar graph here, in 1996-97, the overwintering population occupied about 45 acres and then plummeted to about 1.7 in 13-14, and since then has been up and down ever since. This past December in 2020, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was tasked with determining if the butterfly should be a listed species, a federally listed species. While they are qualified to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, they'll have to wait their turn, as limited resources are directed to species with higher priority. There are many threats to their population, and the most recent major threats are human imposed. In their overwintering habitat in central Mexico, there's illegal logging of the Oyamela firs, which they land on. They crowd together on the branches, and there's so many butterflies on the branches, they pull the branches down. That's a lot of butterflies. That's where they overwinter, in the mountains in just west of central Mexico, about 5,000 feet elevation. Also, abnormal freezing winter weather has occurred in central Mexico. And a few years ago, there was an ice storm that hit in March. Some of the butterflies had broke dormancy and started flying north, but a lot of them got caught in that ice storm and were frozen to death. So if there's a freezing temperatures at the wrong time of year, too early in the season, before they've left, we could lose the whole eastern population in one fell swoop. Once they reach the United States, habitat loss is another factor, and it's due to row crops and urban development. In 1996, glyphosate-resistant crops, also known as Roundup Ready, were introduced. Glyphosate application reduces the natal habitat, which are the milkweeds. Milkweeds are the only plant that monarchs lay their eggs on, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. Historically, milkweeds occurred throughout the cropland fields and along field edges, but that's been nearly eliminated with the wide use of glyphosate. Now, glyphosate was developed to reduce tillage coverage, tillage trips across the field to reduce weed competition, and also tillage would release carbon from the combustion of the fossil fuels. Also by tilling, you lose carbon from the soils and it compacts the soil. So they thought they were doing a good thing by having Roundup Ready or GMO type seed, but it's kind of backfired on the insects. Milkweed density in the Midwest was estimated to decline by 58% in just 11 years between 1999 and 2010. And we need to remember that insects are like the canary in the coal mine for our ecosystem health. So if they start to decline, that's nature's way of telling us something is wrong. So the increased use of glyphosate correlates with monarch population decline. Overall native habitat loss throughout the landscape follows this trend. In 1995, about 20 million acres were treated with glyphosate. In 2013, over 155 million acres, and I'm sure it's way over that now. So it's an alarming amount of acreage treated with glyphosate, and they're finding a lot of other problems that glyphosate has caused in human health also. A large number of factors affect the population decline. A couple are natural, most human. As you can see on the slide, I have it highlighted in yellow. These are the natural factors, natural enemies, and competition from other herbivores. Dry conditions in Texas in April could have been a natural occurrence. More recently, possibly more of the climate change type weather patterns. Lepidoptera is the order of butterflies and moths and have a fascinating life cycle that involves metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is the process of transformation from an immature form to an adult form in 2 or more distinct stages. And as you can see, you have the female butterfly laying the egg. The caterpillar develops from the egg, goes through some different stages into the chrysalis, and eventually back to the butterfly again. The life cycle of lepidopterans consists of 4 stages: the egg, the larvae or the caterpillar, the pupa, or also known as the chrysalis, and the adult stage. Caterpillars eat only milkweed. That's why they're so important. They consume milkweed to ingest the milky sap that contains a poison called a cardinalid. Cardinalid is a toxin the plant produces as a defense mechanism to deter predators. And in turn, the caterpillars ingest the cardinalid toxin. Sometimes it kills them, but they've evolved with milkweed, and over time have evolved a metabolism that can usually handle the cardinalid to metabolize that and incorporates that into their own body, which helps them deter predators. And one way they let the way they let predators know that they shouldn't be eaten are by their bright colors. So whenever you see brightly colored insects, they're warning their predators that somehow they don't taste good, might make them sick, and you know what, just might kill them, so you just better leave them alone. And the adults, they get their energy source from nectar. And the more diverse nectar sources they have, more floral diversity, the better off they'll sustain through their life cycles also. So here we have in more detail of the life cycle of the caterpillar. The egg is typically laid on the underside of the monarch leaf. That egg is really small. It's about the size of a pinhead. Once you train your eye for it, you can pick it out pretty readily, and it does have these little ridges on it. It's a beautiful little egg. And so when the larvae emerges, or the scientific term for the larvae emerging from the egg is called eclosion. It doesn't have any stripes, and it's really small because that egg's really small. Of course, you can kind of see when it's getting ready to eclose or emerge, you can see kind of a dark spot. The shell becomes more translucent, and it's kind of a darker spot in there. So you just keep watching it. If you ever raise monarchs, you know what I'm talking about. And that little guy is so small, the only thing that he can manage to eat are the hairs on the back of the leaf. So once he starts to bite into the tissue and starts to consume that milky sap, then he gets his stripes. I thought that was pretty neat. So the first instar stage, of course, is very small, and as they grow and they eat, all they do is eat and eliminate, and sleep, just like babies. So once it gets to a certain size, the skin can't expand anymore, and it splits the skin open, and the second instar stage is revealed. And the same thing happens until it reaches the 5th star end stage, and then it will hang upside down in the J stage. It will attach itself on the underside of something secure and hidden. They like to be hidden from predators because they're very vulnerable at this point. And then it starts the metamorphosis process. What really happens is it's a cellular change. Basically, that caterpillar forms that chrysalis, and once the chrysalis is hardened, it's liquid. It's liquid, it's rearranging, it's at a cellular level into the form of a butterfly. So it's quite fascinating. And it takes about a month from the egg to adult for the whole process to occur. These are organisms that can't control their own temperature. They depend on the air temperature. So the warmer it is, the faster the metabolism will go. So the faster this process will happen, not a whole lot faster, but maybe a few days faster. And conversely, the cooler it is, the slower this process is. We have a Monarch in the Making poster that myself and Kara Clark developed. She's at our state office. She's a fantastic graphic artist. And she took my photos. I told her how I wanted it. And we have this available. It's on a PDF form. It's on the Illinois NRCS Pollinator webpage. We also have hard copies. If anybody's unable to get one printed, we have quite a few at the state office. Just let us know, and we can mail you a few. We really like them to go to schools for educational purposes. But that's available for your use free of charge. Now, when the first generation ends up in the United States, the females lay eggs in Texas exclusively on milkweeds, and these are known as the host plants. So that's what we mean by host plants. That's what those critters, whatever they may be, use for their larval stage or the young stage. And then the adults go nectaring on a diverse number of forbs, purple coneflower, blazing star, to name a couple. And of course, they also nectar on the milkweed flowers. So the breeding generation, which we see here in Illinois, and usually by the time they reach Illinois, we're seeing possibly the 3rd generation of butterflies that have migrated from central Mexico. They only live 2 to 6 weeks. And the reason for that being, they're in the reproductive stage. Their focus is to reproduce, to perpetuate the species. And it takes a lot of energy to reproduce. The male inserts a spermatophore. It's a packet of sperm and nutrients proteins and energy for the female so that she can carry out laying eggs. She can lay up to 400 eggs if she lives that long. She doesn't die before that. So that's why insect populations can increase or decrease so much. If they have good success in breeding, then their populations are really going to flourish. So the overwintering generation lives up to 9 months. This overwintering generation is known as the Methuselah generation. They live, well, compared to 2 to 6 weeks, that's a long time, 9 months. They enter a reproductive diapause, which is they just don't fully mature to be able to reproduce that last generation in late summer, early fall. They think that the shorter days, maybe the dying of the milkweeds kind of trigger that response. They're not really sure, but that's what the scientists best surmise would be. So it delays their full development, and it's called reproductive diapause. So that they can fly those 2,000 to 3,000 miles all the way. Some of them go up into Canada and then all the way down to central Mexico. It's just amazing. That's no other insect migrates that far that I know of. So like I said, they leave early August from the northern part of the continent to make it down to Mexico in early November. And for Illinois, the peak migration season is mid-September typically. So don't cut your forbs down, leave your milkweed. They need that as little way stations on the way south. And then once they, in March, they'll break dormancy. Then they fully mature to be able to reproduce. They mate and head back north looking for some milkweeds. So they get into Texas when those milkweeds are first coming up. They're very fresh, young plants. And hopefully the timing's right, that plants will be available. One year I saw monarchs here in Illinois in April because there was a really strong south wind, real strong south wind in Texas for 2 weeks, sustained, and it blew the monarchs north too soon. And I just felt really, really bad that year for the first or first generation probably that made it to Illinois in an untimely manner there. I don't know if you folks know who figured out the migration route, but for years they didn't know where the monarchs went. And there was a Canadian entomologist, Dr. Fred Urquhart. He dedicated his life to research on the monarchs. He and his wife traveled all over the South trying to figure out where the monarchs went. He started in 1937, and then in 1975, they finally figured it out. And he's the one that started the tags on the wings and started Citizen Science Watch and the Monarch Watch organization. So I believe I provided a link for that. They're going to put that in the chat for you. So as the monarchs move into new areas in the spring, they find young host plants just days after the plants emerge on their own. And the females do seem to prefer new growth for their larvae. And they believe that the leaves are more palatable when the plants are younger. And I've noticed that in my gardens around the house. I watch the females and they are going for the younger plants. Especially common milkweed, if you notice the older leaves, they're more leathery, and I'm sure it's more difficult for the larvae, especially those little guys that just first emerged or eclosed from the egg. It's kind of tough for them to consume. This iconic butterfly knows no political boundaries. As you saw in some of the slides, that they go from Canada to Mexico. So we have 3 political boundaries, and yet they know no boundaries, and they inspire international cooperation to save them. We can all contribute to the conservation of the iconic butterfly, whether we have a patio, a yard, or acres of land for establishing milkweed and native forbs. So what we need to do, what each of us can do in our own capacity, is to help protect native areas, if you have any on your property, and encourage production or reproduction of milkweed, and then also the flowering plants, the native forbs. And they're mostly prairie forbs, while there are, of course, some savanna and woodland forbs too that are beneficial to the butterfly. And trees, they like to roost in trees, especially if you've ever seen them gathering in the fall. They all seem to congregate and fly in number. I don't know if that's safety in number, or yeah, I don't know if anybody really knows, but they're so beautiful, clustered in the trees, gathering for the fall migration. And for the forbs, for the adult nectarine, which is really important in the fall to have an abundance of forbs for them, they use different species at different times of year for their life cycle needs. And so it's best if we plant a most diverse suite of native forbs for them. While there are 22 native species of milkweed, the host plant, in Illinois, 4 are endangered and 1 is threatened. And only 4 of these 22 are very readily available on the market at this time, especially in the seed form. There are a couple more that you can get in live plant form from certain native nurseries. One of the issues is milkweeds are pretty finicky when it comes to pod set, the seeds becoming mature, and then also germination. They're very finicky. A lot of them are susceptible to damp off, which is like a fungus that gets on the soil surface. But so we have swamp milkweed on the lower left, which is really good for wet sites. Common milkweed from somewhat poorly drained to drier sites. That is the milkweed that was all throughout the agricultural landscape prior to the extreme use of Roundup. Here we have the world milkweed. This is a wonderful, it's a shorter stature milkweed, very thin-leaved also, and it's really good for dry sites. It flourishes in sandy sites, less competition. You can go anywhere from mesic to dry to sandy, and butterfly milkweed can go anywhere from mesic or medium moisture to drier sites. And it has a very fuzzy leaf, so sometimes, and different plants have different amounts of fuzziness on their leaf, and it's thought that sometimes the monarchs don't prefer to lay their eggs on them. Seems like swamp milkweed is the most palatable. It has a very thin leaf, and if you have swamp milkweed, you're going to get a lot of monarchs on there. And I had to throw in meadow blazing star. It's a liatris or blazing star forb. It's not native to Illinois, but it's worth mention because it's the monarch magnet. It's native to west of the Mississippi, but I do have it in my gardens because I've had another species, Pycnostachya and Ligula stylus, growing just feet apart, and they never touch the Pycnostachya. They always land on the Ligula stylus. Anyway, I just had to mention that one. That's a really good one to have. And NRCS and Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation work. They're a nonprofit organization out of Portland, Oregon. They're entomologists, and we work very closely with them on our pollinator habitat and monarch habitat requirements, and to ensure that our seeding recommendations provide the needed species richness and abundance of forbs throughout their growing season for all insects. We've developed a list of monarch preferred forbs for the Midwest, and this consists of over 140 species of native forbs, and I've listed the genus here of those species just for a quick reference. And of course, Asclepius is the host plant and a very important nectarine plant, also That would be the milkweed genus. Monarchs and Milkweeds is a fantastic read if you want to dive deep into the coevolution of the two species. And I think I forgot to mention that there are other insects that eat milkweeds. So if the milkweed starts to get predated upon, something starts to eat it, it can increase its cardinalate concentration to ward off those predators. And then sometimes that concentration is too high for the monarch to lay its egg on. And actually monarchs they can't see very well, but they can see the shape. They just like, oh, that looks like a milkweed. And so they'll land on it, and they have sensors in their feet, and they can, like, quote unquote, taste it, and they can tell the concentration of cardinalate in that milkweed and determine if it's acceptable or not for them to lay an egg on. It's just fascinating. So he goes into all that in Monarchs and Milkweed. If you're at all interested in that, I highly recommend it. And here are a few publications that XERC provides. This can also be found from the link xerces.org or from the Illinois NRCS Pollinator page. And they have one on native milkweeds for the central United States region and other regions in the nation. And one you might be interested in, Milkweeds, a Conservation Practitioner's Guide. Plant ecology, seed production methods, and habitat restoration opportunities. Again, xerces.org is a great resource for all kinds of information about insects. So, well, I encourage you all to go out there and plant some wonderful monarch habitat. It's spring now, and this is just a great time to start thinking about planting a garden. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ellen. I didn't realize that about the monarch's eyesight. I didn't realize it was so poor. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating. They're fascinating creatures.
Especially to have such a far way to migrate with poor eyesight. That would be pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
nobody's really sure how they know how to do that either. So.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. And next up, we have Megan Andrews. I see that she's sharing her screen here. So Megan is a soil conservationist for NRCS, and she'll be sharing about program opportunities that are available through NRCS for individuals who are interested in pollinator habitat. Megan worked for the Kendall County Soil and Water Conservation District for 16 years, assisting producers and landowners with their natural resource concerns before transitioning to NRCS last spring. She is located in the Yorkville field office and continues to share her knowledge and expertise with the community. So Megan, you can take it away.
Thanks, Alyse. Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to join you all. With all the detailed information that Eleanor, Vicki, and Ellen have expertly shared this afternoon, I'm sure many of you are now inspired and ready to plan your own pollinator habitat. So as we continue our migration through our webinar this afternoon, I wanted just to take a few minutes to quickly share some program opportunities and resources related to pollinator habitat that NRCS has available. You've heard the Illinois Pollinator website shared several times this afternoon. The link has been provided to you in the chat. I wanted to take a few minutes and buzz around this website a little bit to share some additional resources that can be right at your fingertips as you get ready to develop your own plan for your own garden. There are several helpful resources on the Illinois NRCS webpage. If you navigate in the top left corner from topics, you can select plants and animals, and from there, insects and pollinators. And this will take you to this website that Ellen and Vicki had a hand in putting together. All in one space on this website are all the different resources that have been detailed and shared, along with some additional. We've got information on pollinators, brochures to download. Here's that pollinator design guide that Vicki had shared with you. This is a quick way to download that. Like she had shared this afternoon, There's a lot of good information for different sites, different species, all at your fingertips, all in one quick download. Also on this website, they have information on the different pollinator plants that you can select based on your site. What I like about these is they're just a one-page quick fact sheet with just a snapshot of the species that you can use that would be well designed depending on your site, if it's dry or wet, and the type of sun you get as well. And as Ellen had shared, we can't forget about those monarchs. So in taking a look through that information, there's additional resources for programs that Illinois NRCS has available for landowners and for farmers in incorporating monarch habitat on your land. There's some additional information as you dig a little bit deeper. We have job sheets here at Illinois NRCS that help us in planning and providing information to our customers on how you install, implement, and maintain different conservation practices such as pollinator habitat or monarch habitat. And if you'd like to see that for yourself, this is also located on that page as well. We also have some detailed information for those science lovers out there. We have biology and habitat technical notes. These are a little bit more detailed. As you can tell, this one has a few more pages to it. But with that, there's information on long-term management of larger habitat, as well as, like I mentioned, some more detailed scientific technical information. What I also really like about the Illinois NRCS pollinator page is that there's a quick resource links incorporated as well. You've heard everyone refer to the Xerces Society, and that link is easily located as well. And again, all of these are all on one page. The ladies worked really hard to make sure that these were all at your fingertips in one location, so you didn't have to click around multiple times. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the Illinois NRCS pollinator page, it's definitely worth your time to take a look. And one more plug, as Ellen had kindly mentioned, she, along with Kara at the Illinois NRCS state office, had created a monarch poster incorporating Ellen's pictures that she had taken. And if you wanted quick access to that, that's also available on that Illinois NRCS pollinator page for quick download. Also on the Illinois NRCS webpage, on the home page, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner a link for ePhotog, or Photog, as you'll see it referred to now. This is a state-specific resource that I find to be very helpful. The snapshot below shows you the specific section that I would take and spend your time at, section 4. After selecting Illinois and hitting submit, the different sections will pop up. Under section 4 are the conservation practice standards that are available for being a helpful reference with standards and specifications as you're planning your different conservation practices, such as pollinator habitat. And there's one other helpful resource as well. Under that ecological science tools, you'll find the Illinois Native Seed Calculator. Looking a little bit more in depth in the conservation practice standard, I wanted to share this just briefly with you for those of you that may not have seen one of these before. We've got a bit of a different audience today, so many of you are probably looking to plan these on your own, or maybe there are those of you who are designers who will be creating these. When someone gets assistance through the NRCS or SWCD office, we'll work through a practice standard to develop the different plan specifications that'll be needed to implement your conservation practice. But if you want to just take a look at this on your own or work separately from that, a practice standard is a really great resource for you. All in one place, it provides you with not only what the practice can be used for, but the place where you can go ahead and implement that practice. It'll even give you specific criteria so you can go ahead and make sure to have that practice well suited for your location and be a success. There's even additional considerations provided to ensure optimal success. The other resource we mentioned under that section 4 of the field office technical guide is this native seed calculator. And this native seed calculator is a really great resource. From there, you're able to download it and it opens into an Excel workbook, and there's several tabs at the bottom to check out. Instructions provide you with a step-by-step if you'd like to work through this on your own. And this helpful calculator allows you to select specific species from grasses to native forbs that you can use in planting your own garden. As you continue to click through those tabs at the bottom of the screen, there's even a detailed library of those different species that contains the common name, the scientific name, the types of habitat where this is best suited, as well as a lot of other detailed information as you make your way through. It's definitely worth a look. So from there, I wanted to take just a quick moment to share with you some information about different program opportunities so you can incorporate pollinator habitat or monarch butterfly habitat on your property. Illinois NRCS provides technical and financial assistance to landowners and operators at their request. And our programs are provided through the federal Farm Bill. And that Farm Bill assists with the cost of implementing conservation practices such as pollinator habitat. So let's go ahead and fly through these really quickly. First, there's the Conservation Reserve Program, and we like acronyms. So many of you are used to hearing that referred to as CRP. This is a program that's administered by the Farm Service Agency, and NRCS provides technical assistance. And conservation practices can include pollinator habitat. There's cost share to establish. There's even an annual rental payment as well as some additional financial incentives. Another program is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. That allows you to address a resource concern and then establish a conservation practice, such as a pollinator habitat, to address your conservation needs. Funding is provided based on different payment scenarios. Another opportunity is through the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. This allows landowners to maintain their existing conservation system on their agricultural land and implement new enhancements, again, such as pollinator habitat, into their operation. Payment for this program is provided for current stewardship activities, those conservation practices that are already being implemented on the farm, as well as for trying new activities or enhancements. Finally, there's the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP. This is a program that allows for conservation easements to protect, restore, and enhance habitat on working lands. This allows for an opportunity to incorporate native species, provide habitat for pollinators and those monarch butterflies. Each of these programs has different requirements, some information to take note of regarding eligibility. If you're interested in learning more about the different program opportunities or just what resources are available as you're looking to maybe plan your own pollinator habitat or dig a little deeper, please feel free to contact your local field office to connect with NRCS or SWCD staff. You've kindly met Alyse today. She is here in the Yorkville field office. Spring and Brooke are also with Soil and Water down in Grundy County and then up in McHenry Lake. And then you've kindly met several of the NRCS specialists today who provide the important expert background information that we use to provide our planning resources to everyone interested in incorporating conservation on your land. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alyse to share some information on programs that the Kendall County Soil and Water Conservation District has available.
Great, thanks, Megan. Thanks for sharing those resources. All right, I will start sharing my screen here. All right, can everyone see that okay? Okay. All right. Again, my name is Alyse Olson, and I'll be sharing some program opportunities that are available through soil and water districts for individuals who are interested in pollinator habitat. Like NRCS, we have opportunities that are available to landowners who are interested in incorporating pollinator plantings on their land. SWCDs can offer technical and financial assistance to landowners who are interested in incorporating best management practices that help to conserve soil and protect water quality. Those practices could include a pollinator habitat, for example. We also often work with farmers who want to incorporate things like cover crops, grass waterways, filter strips along ecologically sensitive areas, and other practices into their operation to help address resource concerns like erosion and poor water quality. So soil and water districts can help work through the technical details with a landowner who is interested in a particular conservation practice. For example, with a pollinator habitat, your district can help with site selection, and they can provide information on how to prepare your site for planting, like Vicki shared with us earlier. They can offer seed mix selection recommendations and seeding rate recommendations. Your district could also help you with seeding and planting methods that work best for you and your site. And they can also provide information on site management for after your site is planted in order to make sure it's a successful planting. SWCDs can also provide financial assistance through the state-funded Partners for Conservation program, which allocates funding for conservation best management practices. The program is administered by your local county's SWCD office, and financial assistance through the district is dependent on available funds. An interested landowner can contact the office and set up a contract with the district, which lays out the length of time the landowner is responsible for maintaining the practice and the amount of funding that the district is able to provide towards the project. A pollinator habitat is required to be maintained for at least 5 years, and but it can continue to be maintained as a pollinator habitat even after the contract is up with the district. Districts can provide up to 75% cost share assistance. Some districts provide a smaller percentage based on program interest and wanting to spread the program funding to as many people as possible. The landowner is then responsible for the remaining cost of that project. A payment from the district is issued to the landowner once the project is complete, and documentation such as receipts and seeding tags are submitted to the office and reviewed for accuracy. A site visit is typically necessary as well. All right, so on this slide, I have the contact information of all of the presenters for today. And Spring, if there are any questions in the chat, we could take those now.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
There were a couple that were previously asked, but Ellen and Eleanor actually answered them in the chat. So right now we don't have any questions unless someone wants to enter some in quickly.
Okay, and if anyone wants to turn on their microphone and ask them verbally, we can take those as well.
All right, we do have one question from Nanette. In mesic sites, which species of milkweed is the #1 preferred species for the monarch to lay its eggs on? Which species of milkweed is second?
Well, I'll give some thought to that. It's Ellen. So the experts say common milkweed is the most preferred. I have 6 species of milkweed in my own yard at home, and I see them using different ones different years. So it's really hard to say, but I think a safe bet would be common milkweed if you have the space for it. It goes rhizomatous really quickly, and that's one reason why the farmers weren't a big fan of it, because it really does take over quite fast. Another one that doesn't, it's very similar to common, has larger flowers on it is prairie milkweed. It's a little bit harder to find in the nurseries, but that's a good one too. And then, like I said, for mesic sites, butterfly milkweed is one of the few orange flowers that we have, which is very beautiful, and they will use that. So
I'd also add that on the plants that are like the common milkweed that can spread by rhizomes pretty aggressively, you might even, if you want to add it to your garden, but you're concerned about it taking over, you could even try planting it in a container, and that preventing it from getting to the rest of the garden, like a big container.
Yeah, that's a good idea. They got to watch those seeds though, so you can deadhead them so the seed pods don't split open and spread.
Thank you. We have another question here. What is the easiest milkweed to grow in a beginner backyard garden?
I know we have common milkweed and we have butterfly milkweed out at the field office in Peoria, and both of them were really pretty easy to grow. We did grow them from potted plant, or well, the common milkweed just appeared and we let it stay. But the butterfly milkweed, we had gotten it originally as a potted plant and planted it, and it did fine. And then we planted some world milkweed, and it's done well as well, but it's not quite as suited to the site as the butterfly milkweed is, just because of our particular site. And the last thing I would add is that we did plant butterfly milkweed twice. And in my presentation, this is Vicki, I talked about the importance of maintenance. And the first time we planted it, we actually planted it from a plug, and we planted it, on an extremely hot day on the south side of a building. And then we forgot to water it. So if you really want to kill a plant, that's a great way to do it. I'm just kidding. You don't want to kill a plant, but.
I see a lot of questions coming in about milkweed. What's the easiest to grow? Well, if you get a milkweed from a nursery that's in a pot and you have the right site, that's going to be the one that's easiest to grow. Swamp milkweed, I saw one come in from Tom. Swamp milkweed I had in my yard, it only lasted about 3 years. My yard is mesic, so I think you really need wet or somewhat poorly drained soils, or else you're going to have to water it. And I'm not watering mine with city water, just anyway. So I really think, so starting from seed or starting from plant, they're like kind of different ball games there. But if you get live plants and you have the right moisture regime in your yard for that plant, you're going to have success. And like Vicki said, you do need to water them the first year. We had to water the pollinator garden. We got hoses and sprinklers out there, and I watered it whenever it didn't rain. Typically, if it didn't rain in a week or so time, I would haul them out there and water the garden. It's setting the roots. It's getting those roots established. Once those roots are established, we didn't water it after that. So the second year, it didn't need watering. Same thing in my yard.
Yeah, and too, I would add on to that too, that the difference between planting a garden using plugs or potted plants versus seeding. One of the things, if you decide to use seed, you want to keep in mind is that it takes a few years for it to really get established. The DC in our office always describes the process as, let me see if I can remember this. The first year the plants sleep, they're really putting their energy into putting roots into the ground. In the second year they creep, still putting energy into putting roots into the ground. And then the third year they leap. So if you can remember, it'll take a few years for a seeded planting to get going, and it's going to sleep, then creep, and then leap.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. You have to be patient if you start from seed. I saw that Chris asked about tropical milkweed in Illinois. It's typically not recommended. You could plant it, but then you need to cut it down. So peak migration in Illinois is mid-September. So depending on what part of Illinois you're in, here it is middle of September in the central part of Illinois. I would cut it down so that the monarchs aren't tempted to hang around. That's a problem. That could be a problem it should die out in the wintertime because it is a tropical one, but I'd highly suggest sticking with the natives.
I know the tropical one too. I think that in areas where people do try to overwinter it, it can harbor some pests that give the monarchs problems. I don't remember if it's an aphid or a disease, but
I think it's some kind of pathogen.
okay.
Yeah.
I think this next question is probably for Ellen. Is it safe to burn woods or a prairie site, and when is the best time to do so?
Is it safe to burn? Do you know what you're doing? That would be my first question. So prescribed burning is an extremely useful tool, but a healthy fear of it is always good. I would highly suggest taking a workshop for prescribed burning to know what you're doing and have an experienced crew with you. Just don't go out there and light a match. Woodland burning is help if you can fire to go. Keeping fire, it's low and molder. Pretty fast, furious, depending on the fuels that are. I would just recommend knowing what you're doing. But yeah, so fall burns typically promote some grasses for the prairies. Recommend fall burns if you can, because a lot of times people burn in March.
Is Ellen cutting out on you, Alyse?
Yeah, I'm hearing some cutting out, Ellen.
Well, Ellen's coming back on. I'm gonna just answer another question that was on here. Someone asked if it would be possible to send us an email with all these websites and email addresses. And yes, I believe we can do that. But also, if you go to the chat function, if you place your cursor in the top right corner where there's 3 little dots and it does say more, if you click on that, right at the top, it says that you can save the chat. And that way you can save all those websites as well.
So can you see my chat box spring pop up here?
I have mine open.
It might not be sharing that part of my screen, but I was just going to do a demonstration for people, but it looks like that doesn't pop up when I share my screen. Were there any other questions that came in?
We just got a new one. What are good fall natives for pollinators?
What are good fall natives for pollinators?
Correct.
Like the asters would be good, and the
There's some great golden
silphiums. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Great goldenrods, just not Canada goldenrod and not tall goldenrod. There's so many species of goldenrod.
We got in our guide, we've got like rattlesnake master also flowers into the fall, and rough blazing star into the fall. Blue lobelia, closed gentian, cardinal flower, and turtlehead are also all late season bloomers for wetter sites, those 4. But if you go to any of those sites we mentioned, you'll be able to find when plants flower as well.
We have another question here. Is late figwort good for pollinators?
I believe it is on the calculator. I have personally have not used it, but I do believe it's on our pollinator calculator.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's more a savanna plant.
And that is all the questions I'm seeing right now, unless someone has another one that they'd like to add.
Okay. Oh, I think I saw something pop in. Was that another question?
Nope, just a thank you.
Okay.
Lots
Great.
of thank yous.
Oh, perfect. Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions right now, before we close, I just wanted to thank our presenters and co-hosts for taking time out of your schedules to be here today and share your information with us. Everyone had such wonderful presentations with a lot of great information and pictures and visuals. I also want to thank all the participants for joining in today. We truly appreciate your interest in today's topic, and we also appreciate your support of the Soil and Water Districts and the NRCS. So with that, I guess we will close it out. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Alyse.